this morning, the one I do have to continue having our conversations relating to the NAM Summit today. And joining me is coming in from the Ministry of Water and Environment. He is the commissioner from the ministry, none other than Dr. Calist Tindimugaya. A very good morning, Doctor, and many thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning, viewers.
And well, of course, Doctor is here with us to discuss more of the same and bringing greetings right from the Ministry of Water and Environment. Doctor, as we continue having these conversations, or as we kickstart off our conversation, what is your take-home points in relation to the observation from our first 3 days of the NAM Summit that we've hosted this year?
Thank you very much. Again, greetings to viewers from the Ministry of Water and Environment. The Ministry of Water and Environment is the government institution responsible for issues of water, environment, and climate change. And as viewers may have noted, one of the key issues being discussed under NAM is climate change. Now, climate change is a global issue, and is something which is of a concern to everybody. And of course, climate change affects many, many things we do. Our economies, our livelihoods, our well-being is all determined by the changes in climate. So right now, under NAM, one thing I've picked is climate change has actually been very, very key. Yes. All countries are very much concerned about the changing climate. Last year, we had a conference on climate change in Dubai, COP28, yes, which discussed many, many things regarding climate change, and NAM has actually picked on that and tried to bring the countries together to take action to implement the recommendations of COP28. So I'm happy that climate change has continued to feature very, very strongly, and I expect that at the end of this summit, more concrete actions at the heads of state level will have been taken so that we can move the recommendations of COP28 forward.
And well, of course, speaking of climate change, day one, when the two committees were put in place, one, the political committee, the second was the Social and Economic Affairs Committee. The Social and Economic Affairs Committee pretty much focused more on the issue of climate change and matters to do with climate change financing. Doctor, when you look at climate change financing, we as Uganda are among the developing countries, and one of the challenges we are still facing is the financing part of it. When you look at the discussions that should be put up there, what are the measures that you think or believe should be prioritized in order to seek for these finances that will help countries like Uganda address climate change?
Yes, indeed, issue of financing is very, very important because you need the money to address these challenges. Of course, maybe for the benefit of the viewers, if you want to know that the climate change, you see it in either too much water resulting in floods, too little water resulting in droughts, and too dirty water resulting in pollution. And of course, also we have landslides. Now, to address those challenges, you need money. And money cannot be got from the usual sources. We need to get money from those sources that actually are there, that have been put in place within a climate change framework. We have, for example, climate financing for adaptation, that you need to live with these changes and be able to survive. For developing countries, our major priority regarding climate change is adaptation. While for developed countries, the issue of mitigation, basically reducing the greenhouse gas emissions so that you control temperature rise. So for us, we need money for adaptation. And in NAM, one of the things that I would want our leaders and the delegates to discuss is how do we access this financing? Right now, some studies have been done and indicated that really climate financing is not reaching the ground. About only less than 30% reaches the ground, and yet this is where challenges are occurring. So I would want NAM to discuss very, very strongly on how we are going to ensure that climate financing actually reaches the common person who is impacted by climate change. The other issue also we need to think through is how to build our capacity to actually tap into these resources and be able to utilize these resources to cause change. So climate financing, yes, key, but there's a lot that we still need to do to ensure that these resources are accessed from the global sources, from different sources, and this money reaches the people on the ground.
Doctor, before we even go further into our discussion, or before we dig deeper into the conversations of NAM and climate change, how serious is climate change? Because to the viewers out there, at times, as much as we continue to tell them on the practices that will not lead to climate change or that will not affect climate, how serious is it? Just give us a picture of that.
Well, really, climate change is a very, very big issue, and I'm going to put it in simple terms which people really will understand. Let's look at the case of Kampala. When it rains, even for just 1 hour, the whole of Kampala will flood, you will get traffic jam, really people will be affected. Now, these are things that have not been happening in the past, they're happening now. So right now we are having climate change manifesting too much water, and that water is coming within a short period. Basically, our water comes from rainfall. So climate is changing the rainfall patterns. We are having a lot of water falling within a very, very short period. And when it falls within a very short period, it finds us not ready. Like, for example, in Kampala, most of the areas are paved. So when it rains, the water will always try to find where to go. Our drainage channels are narrow, but many of them are already full of garbage. A lot of waste is thrown in there. So when it rains for a short period, that's why we see Kampala flooding. Now, if we don't address the challenges, the causes of climate change, and be able to deal with the problem, then Uganda is going to be a country that is difficult to live in. If you see, for example, in areas like Kasese, you have had flooding in Kasese, Nyamwamba, people dying every year, and the situation is getting worse. If you go, for example, this time in Uganda, the same. But also in some areas, like for example in Karamoja, the areas which we normally call the cattle corridor dry areas, the drought situation is intensifying. And that's why Uganda right now has realized that we can no longer continue depending on rain-fed agriculture. The rainfall is, the rainfall patterns are changing. Periods where people used to expect rainfall, the rain doesn't come. Periods when they don't expect rainfall and they expect a dry period, then it is raining. So these changes are happening because of the changing climate, and already people are seeing it. Temperatures are going up. Places like Kabale, for example, which used to be cold and people would put on jackets and sweaters. You go there, you don't even have to put on a sweater. The temperatures are increasing because of the changing climate. So we need to take action now to ensure that these problems don't cause a serious issues for us and for our socio-economic development.
All right, now news reaching us, as you have definitely seen on your screen, on the split screen, that you're definitely seeing images or footage from the Entebbe International Airport. A plane that has just landed is the Ethiopian, the plane that is coming to, that is going to land, forget the plane that is actually, that has just landed, but the plane that is going to land is of the Vice President of Cuba. So we expect to receive, as you are definitely seeing, we expect to receive His Excellency Salvador Valdez Mesa, who is the Vice President of Cuba. Now, just a quick one to give you some bit of the history of Cuba and its relation to the non-aligned movement. It will definitely stretch back to the early 1970s. If you're to look at it, Cuba did make a major effort to assume a leadership role in the world's non-aligned movement, and the country established military advisory missions and economic and social reforms programs as it was aiming at joining the non-aligned movement. And well, that did not only end there. When you look at the 6th summit of this nature, if I'm to put it in that way, it's more like the 6th summit of the non-aligned movement. Currently, it's the 19th summit. The 6th summit of the non-aligned movement was hosted by Cuba. That was between the 3rd to the 9th of September in 1979 in Havana. Now, Havana is the capital city of Cuba. 93 countries took part in that summit. That was that was hosted by Cuba. And of course, on your screen, we expect to have the Vice President of Cuba on his way to the Non-Aligned Movement Summit here in Uganda. And of course, His Excellency Salvador Valdez Mesa, the Vice President of Cuba, who will be received at the Entebbe International Airport, amongst the key delegates that we expect to be making their way to Uganda today. And of course, not only him, but we expect to have more and more of the other delegates that will be coming. And of course, furthermore, to give you details about Cuba and of course with the non-aligned movement, just to give you a clear picture to see how pivotal and how vital Cuba is in relation to NAM, you get to realize that when 93 countries took part in the summit, it was the first NAM summit which took place in one of the Libero-American countries. So it was the first to take place in those areas or in the Libero-American countries. The event was marked by political and ideological divisions among the non-aligned countries. Of course, this is the reason as to why most of these summits take place. Everyone has ideas, everyone has decisions that are supposed to be put in place, or everyone has issues at hand. And in the 6th summit of that nature, which was hosted by Cuba in the capital of Havana, did clearly have political and ideological divisions that were there in the 6th summit. But besides that, when you look at the organizer, wanted to use the event to promote a natural alliance between the movement and the Eastern Bloc, causing strong resistance from some member states. Remember, at the initial start of the non-aligned movement, they had decided, or the decision was, to withstand from choosing positions either to align with the Eastern Bloc or the Western Bloc, but rather have one major goal: to put an end to this, to the violent way of coming up with decisions. So the major objective was also aiming at peaceful means of creating room for dialogue as well. And furthermore, when you look at the situation here, this event was earmarked by the political and the ideological divisions. Now, when it comes to the political part of it, this is where you realize that the movement, there was a natural alliance between NAM and the Eastern Bloc, causing strong resistance from some members, particularly Yugoslavia. Now, Yugoslavia, which is also among the member states that did, of course, or the founder states of the non-aligned movement, making it the 5, Yugoslavia, Indonesia, India, Egypt, and Ghana, were the 5 member states that kick-started off this particular non-aligned movement. Of course, what you're seeing on your screen, as we go further with a few details of how Cuba has been very influential as well and impactful with the non-aligned movement, as we await for the arrival of the Vice President of Cuba, who is on his way to the Entebbe International Airport. As you can see, we are waiting for his arrival, and of course there's a guard of honor that is highly waiting on him. Now, as we go deeper, while both Cuba and Yugoslavia were at the time normally socialist states, they took substantially different positions in world politics, with Cuba perceiving United States and Yugoslavia perceiving the Soviet Union, or what you could say the USSR. Now, during such a time where the world was still in the battles of the Cold War, it wasn't the physical war, but rather filled up with threats and, of course, different kind of blocks that were created. And, of course, the politics at play during such time were at pointing fingers to one another, and there was worry that there was going to be an outbreak of Third World War. Remember, after the World War, that is the Second World War, from 1941 to 1945, you get to realize that the United Nations organization was created. One of the reasons as to why it was created during such a time was to create room for peace. Now, the United Nations is the leading world body in regards to how many member states are coming together in it. It is only NAM that comes second to the United Nations. Now, afterwards, you realize from 1945, as we moved to 1970s, to the early 1970s, there was a Cold War situation between the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc. Now, the Western Bloc, led by the United States, that was emerging as a superpower, then followed by the Eastern Bloc, which had the Soviet Union, or what you can assume as Russia as of now. And in the situation of that nature, you could see Cuba was perceiving the United States. Now, Yugoslavia was perceiving the Soviet Union. And this is where the diplomatic and political, as well as the other differences came about. And when you look at the 6th summit, which was hosted by Cuba, this is where most of the issues came from, and everything became a little bit more, there was some disorganization from the fact that the member states who had actually come for their main cause could not really come to a common understanding, because some of these states had chosen blocks. And it's something that was not supposed to be, because as of now, the reason as to why NAM is still here is because most of these countries, or most of the countries under it, are developing countries who are pushing for one common cause of achieving growth, development, and also making sure that the Agenda 2030, which is focusing on sustainable development, and also to ensure that there is peace prevailing within the member states. Now, of course, this was a main threat to Cuba's independence, if you're to look at it. And when Yugoslavia was perceiving Soviet Union as the main threat, it is to its independence. You get to realize the bloc, the reason as why there were blocks in here is because most of these countries were already fighting colonialism. And once they were choosing blocks, then ideas were never going to be bought. Just to give you just a quick one of the same. So by the time Cuba hosted the 6th summit of the non-aligned movement, the date was from the 3rd to the 6th of September 1979, and then the city was Havana, just like Kampala in Uganda. Then the chair of that time, the president of Cuba, Fidel Castro. And of course, from there, they were actually following the 5th summit that had been hosted by Sri Lanka in Colombo. And then after the 6th summit, the summit that followed after the 7th summit was hosted by India in New Delhi. That was the 7th summit. And of course, when you look at the 6th summit, still that was hosted by Cuba, as we await for the arrival of the deputy president of Cuba, or the vice president of Cuba. Yugoslavia, which was one of the most active members of the movement, had accused Soviet Union and then other allies of creation of division and efforts to manipulate the non-aligned movement. So when you look at the fact that most of the member states that founded the non-aligned movement did not want any sort of interruption in regards to anyone disorganizing the movement. So they were actually accusing the Soviet Union, on the other hand, as Cuba was standing with the Soviet Union. If I'm to put it into proper context, then Yugoslavia was against the Soviet Union. Now, Yugoslavia, on the other hand, would pursue that the United States would be the better option for them, which, of course, was dividing the non-aligned movement in that regard. But of course, the arrival, as we are waiting for, is His Excellency Salvador Valdez Mesa, the Vice President of Cuba. And on your screen, you can definitely see the preparations from the security officials, and of course also clearly paving way for him to his destination of accommodation. And of course, we will as well be looking forward to see who will be ushering him, or who will be welcoming him into the country. And just furthermore into the 6th summit of this nature, the non-aligned movement, you get to realize in a copy of Fidel Castro's speech in advance via Cuban Minister of Foreign Affairs, just like we have the Minister General J.J. Odong here, who initially opened the summit on Monday, you get to realize that some of the words that Fidel Castro used were as well something that forced some delegates, according to information here, especially the United States representatives who had interests within the NAM section, had to leave the room, according to some of the words that were used during the opening ceremony. So you can easily see it did look like a very controversial summit at the start. And obviously, the reason as to why it was controversial is pretty much because of the fact that there was differences in ideology, and that is something that you would definitely be expecting from such a summit in most areas, if at all we have such cases. And of course, the non-aligned movement is still ongoing, and we have conversations leading to the same. That is why I do have a conversation here this morning with Dr. Calista, as our focus is looking at climate change. Well, Doctor, back to you as we will be heading back to the airport pretty shortly after. But looking at climate change further, you've given us the reason as to why it is a big issue and why Ugandans should pay clear attention. Now, at the issue at hand, what, in your view, should be priority to put an end or to address climate change? We have so many discussions ongoing.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, of course, there are many actions that we need to take to address climate change. There are mitigation actions, basically actions to reduce the greenhouse gas emission into the atmosphere. And we have identified those actions. For example, right now, government has reduced on the importation of old vehicles. When you have old vehicles, as they are on the road, they emit gases into the atmosphere, and these gases also end up causing problems. They increase the temperature, and then we have the climate changing. We are also having actions related to waste management, actions also related to energy. Right now, that's why the country is focusing on renewable energy so that we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the smoke that goes into the atmosphere, improving agricultural practices. But most importantly, as a country, the actions we need to take, which are very, very key and very relevant, actions to adapt to impacts of climate change. Basically, even when we take mitigation actions, we are not going to change the climate so much. It will take many, many years. Now, as we wait for this climate to get better through reduction in the greenhouse gas emissions, we need to live with this climate, and that's why we take adaptation action. And we take adaptation actions in many ways. We take actions through water, through agriculture, through health, all the different sectors. For example, if I talk about adaptation actions that we need to take related to water, if climate change is resulting in too much water, so we are taking actions to harvest this water so that it doesn't become a problem, but it becomes an opportunity. And that's why we are constructing dams, valley tanks, but also restoring the ecosystem, wetlands, river banks, forests. These are natural stores of water. We are also promoting water harvesting on the land so that we can improve soil moisture. So those actions around water will enable us to deal with climate change so that when water is too much, we store it so that we can use it in those periods when it is in limited quantity. It means we are addressing flooding and drought. But also we are taking actions to restore the ecosystem. We call them water catchments. That's where the water comes from. Hills, for example, in many areas are bare, and when it rains, the water will run very fast, wash away the fertile soil, and the fertile soil goes into the valleys, the wetlands, and people are following that soil. So we are now taking actions to restore those degraded hills, those degraded landscapes, so that when the water comes, it is stored there. Even you can grow crops. And we are now turning some of the areas where there was no agriculture going on into productive land as a result of those actions. Of course, restoring wetlands so that they can store the water and release the water gradually, but they are also helping us to actually absorb the greenhouse gases. Tree planting, again, the trees will absorb the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, but they also help us to maintain the flow of water. We call it the water cycle. In agriculture, again, improving agricultural practices, coming up with drought tolerant, for example, crop varieties, and many other things. In health, for example, climate change is coming up with a number of diseases, now coming up with methods where we can deal with these diseases, and of course coming up with drugs and also treatment options that can help us to deal with this. In energy, for example, we are now focusing on renewable energy, solar, wind, as opposed to people using, for example, charcoal. So again, you are helping people to reduce on the greenhouse gas emissions, but you're also helping people to actually to be able to adapt to impacts of climate change. So there are many, many actions that we are taking at the country level and which we need to take to deal with climate change through adaptation, and all of these are being done through the different sectors. And of course, climate change issues are coordinated through the Climate Change Department under the Ministry of Water and Environment, but climate change actions involve everybody, the people on the ground, the people at the national level, the different institutions, the civil society, the cultural institutions, religious institutions, private sector, everybody has a role to take to address climate change. And along with that, of course, we build capacity because climate change is a new issue. So we need to build the capacity of the people to be able to do what needs to be done, but also to be able to respond when these challenges happen. So climate change, but also technology and innovations. Again, we are identifying technological options that can help us to deal with the climate change. And of course, also improving the way we do things, including also financing. Mobilizing financing from different sources. We call them non-traditional sources, private sector, again, climate financing. We have global climate financing, the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, Global Environment Facility, and so forth. Well, thank you.
Doctor, we have 3 nations, not only 3, we have a number of nations that are part of the NAM summit, and we are sharing water bodies. You look at Kenya, Tanzania, we are sharing Lake Victoria. If you're to look further to the let's say to River Nile, we have South Sudan, Sudan, and Egypt. Looking at protection of these water bodies, what needs to be done really to ensure that we come to a common understanding because we share these water bodies?
Thank you very much. I think you have raised an important issue. Just to get the viewers to appreciate that these resources actually don't recognize administrative boundaries. For example, if you look at water, the water we have in Uganda comes from Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and DRC. And indeed, we have actually determined the amount of water we have in the country. Now we know how much water we have in the country. We have 43 billion cubic meters of water as annual renewable water resources in the country. But 69% of that water, that's about 29 billion cubic meters of water, actually comes from outside Uganda's borders. So if we have to secure Uganda and ensure that it has adequate water to meet all the various needs for hydropower, for drinking, for irrigation, for industry, for livestock, for fisheries, we have to work with the other countries. If, for example, the Uganda's borders were closed and the water was not flowing, we would only be remaining with 14 billion cubic meters of water out of 43 billion. So for us, working with the other countries is not an option but a must. And that's why we have organizations that have been put in place to bring all the countries together. We have, for example, under East Africa Community, we have a specific organization called Lake Victoria Basin Organization, basically to look at issues of water and environment. And this is bringing all the countries in East Africa Community to work together to ensure that we sustainably develop and manage these resources. We also have the Nile Basin Initiative, which brings countries that share River Nile. These are 11 countries that share River Nile, and of course Egypt, Sudan, and South Sudan are part, to bring us together so that we can work together to ensure that we look after this water that is available now and in the future. And of course, to note that even when the water comes from Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and DRC and comes to Uganda, this water has to continue South Sudan, Sudan, and Egypt. And this water is international water. It is not owned by Uganda, so Uganda cannot, for example, stop this water from going to the other countries. The way we would not want the other countries to stop water coming to us. So we have these programs, and that's why under NAM, as we also discuss issue of climate change, of course, issues of water, environment are key, because the climate is determined by the way the environment is managed, and of course, the way the water is managed. So it's very, very important that we look at how we work together and as countries that share these resources, so that these resources are available now and in the future for everybody.
Okay, and still furthermore on details in relation to the Vice President of Cuba that we are going to be expecting soon, and his arrival is just on pending, I should say, but we'll be giving you all the details as you can see on your screen, the preparations to receive him. And of course, the two people that will be receiving him is Honorable Millie Babalanda and Lucy Nachobe, who of course Lucy Nachobe is leading or is the chairman of the organizing committee for the NAM 2024 summit. So those will be the two that will receive the Vice President of Cuba at Entebbe International Airport, His Excellency Salvador Valdez Mesa, who will be making his way to the 19th summit of the non-aligned movement. Of course, back to you, Doctor. There is an interesting one. And of course, quite something that we cannot go without mentioning. 2025 is just 11 months away. And since the signing of the final investment decision of the oil and gas sector, Uganda's oil and gas sector is shaping up in the rightful direction. Amongst the member states as well, we do have oil-producing countries which have actually highly developed from the same, speaking of which the United Arab Emirates. But besides that, as we continue looking at it in this way, the oil and gas sector, looking at it in the aspect of climate change, how can we collectively and also be very, efficient with the way we are going to carry it out? One, to address climate change, then secondly, to ensure that it's going to be beneficial to the Ugandans, but most importantly, to prepare ourselves for anything that may likely lead to climate change. How can we mitigate any issue out there that may lead to climate change from our oil and gas sector, that may arise from the oil and gas sector?
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, we are all looking forward to 2025, where we shall start benefiting from our oil. And so the final investment decision was made. But also to mention that probably the viewers would need to know that the reason why the final investment decision delayed was to make sure the country is well prepared to actually tap into the oil. We didn't want to get oil to be a curse, as it has been in some countries. So a lot of work has been done across the various sectors to ensure that oil production and development becomes an opportunity and not a problem. For example, from the water and environment side, we have put in place frameworks to ensure that we manage the environment well, that oil doesn't affect the environment. For example, in the Albert and Graben, oil is being developed around Lake Albert. This Lake Albert is a lake that is shared by Uganda and DRC, but also it is a transboundary water body, because this water also is part of the Nile and goes to South Sudan, Sudan, and Egypt. So we have put in place strategy. For example, we don't want oil to spill onto our water bodies or the environment. So we have developed oil spill contingency plan, that if there is an oil spill, then these are the actions we take. So again, we have put in place institutional frameworks, we have put legal frameworks and strategies to address that. For example, oil underground, the amount of oil you have underground, we need to be pushed out using the same amount of water. We need a lot of water, push it underground, to inject underground so that it can push the oil out. Again, we have put in place, we have developed strategies, we have done studies on how we are going to ensure that that is done without affecting the resource. But from the climate change angle, of course, the international community is pushing countries to move away from fossil fuels. And of course, Uganda has been a country, is one of the countries that is trying to take advantage of the oil. And during the climate change negotiations, countries have indicated that you can't just move away from oil without having alternatives. And that's why the Ministry of Energy is at the forefront of doing that, to make sure that we have a plan how we can move away from fossil oil.
All right. And of course, on the red carpet, as you can see right now, we're going to be receiving the Vice President or the Deputy President of Cuba. I did tell you, Cuba did host the 6th summit of the Non-Aligned Movement in Havana, which is the capital of Cuba. But also, just to remind you that the two officials from the government of Uganda that are to receive the Vice President, that is His Excellency Salvador Mensa Valdez, who are going to be receiving him is Lucy Nachobe. Now, Lucy Nachobe is the head of public service and secretary to the cabinet, and further the chairman of the organizing committee for NAM 2024. But also, we also have the minister to the presidency, that is Honorable Millie Babalanda. The two will be receiving the Honorable, as you can definitely see on the screen. Now, let's take you to the Entebbe International Airport, as we'll return shortly after. International Airport. And besides that, just to give you a quick history and background of the same gentleman who has landed in the country. He's born of 13th, 1945, Salvador Antonio Valdez Mesa, a Cuban politician, a former trade union leader. He's the first, he currently in the rankings, first vice president of Cuba, and he has been vice president since April 2018, and is a member of the political bureau of the Communist Party of Cuba. He was elected to succeed Miguel Diaz-Canel as first vice president of Cuba on 19th April 2018, and he has been received by Honorable Mili Babalanda, who is the Minister for Presidency, and of course Lucy Nachobe, who is the chair of the organizing committee for NAM 2024, if I'm to put it in that way. And of course, also let's to forget, Lucy Nachobe serves as the secretary to the cabinet, but in this particular capacity, the chairperson or the organizing committee chairperson for NAM 2024. Of course, we shall be giving you more details and updates in regards to the delegates or heads of state that will be making their way to the country ahead of the NAM summit. And we also expect more delegates and heads of state that will be coming to Uganda ahead of the G77 plus China summit that will be happening immediately after the NAM summit. Also, we shall be giving you details of the IGAD meeting that is also taking place in Uganda. More of that is what we have for you here as your national broadcaster as we continue to give you more details of the NAM Summit 2024 under the theme Deepening Cooperation for Shared Global Affluence, as it is for the 19th edition of the summit. Of course, our conversations continue as pretty much looking at climate change this time round. I'm still with Dr. Kalesta from the Ministry of Water and Environment, and of course looking and calling up the shots in regards to how we can address climate change, and as a fact, or let's say as something that was tabled before ahead of the NAM summit, and it's something that is already being discussed amongst the ministerial meetings. It was already discussed amongst the senior officials meetings during day 1 and day 2. The meetings so far are closed or behind closed doors as we speak, but the meetings and the discussions are still ongoing. Doctor, we're back to our conversations here on the climate change issue and the non-aligned movement summit that we are having today. You know, the climate change is becoming an issue, and you've talked about the financing, we've talked about the oil and gas sector, protection of water bodies, and of course also the details to do with emissions of the carbon emissions and the like. But when it comes to, you know, pushing for green energy, and you could definitely say something that most of the African countries are not doing so well today, and of course the issue still is with financing. But what are the simpler ways that we can start this journey, or that we can promote this journey, you know, to eliminating these particular carbon emissions, to ensure that we safeguard the environment? Which ways can we, you know, suggest, or which ways can we push through in order to make sure that at least if we do not have the money, but this can be the basics that we can start from as the developing countries, because we make the majority of the non-aligned movement?
Thank you very much. Just to mention that the Ministry of Energy actually has developed energy transition plan, and this plan is helping the country to move away from the current situation where we are having energy sources that are not friendly to the environment. They are also affecting our climate, to those sources that are more friendly. We call them renewable sources of energy. And right now, most of the Ugandans depend on charcoal for their cooking. Many Ugandans will also use the ordinary sources of lighting, for example, the local sources, the tadoba and all of that in the villages. Now, we are moving away from those sources that causes problem. Of course, those emit greenhouse gases which go into the atmosphere and also increase the temperature and also make the climate situation worse. So right now, we know we need money to transition to those more the energy the sources which are more renewable and of course climate resilient sources. Right now we are looking at people using firewood, but we are now saying, can we have improved cook stoves? For example, people may continue using firewood, may continue using charcoal, but can we have those technologies which improve the way we cook? For example, right now I have a number of programs which are supporting the people to have energy-saving cook stoves. That the stove, when maybe one would originally would use 10 pieces of firewood to cook one meal, now people are using maybe 2 pieces. So we are now at least improving the way we are doing things as we wait to transition to more climate resilient and favorable cooking sources. We now have people are moving away from, for example, using the tadovers. People are having solar in many areas. Even in the rural areas, we find that people are having lighting based on solar. Of course, the government is promoting use of gas, although it is still quite expensive. We know our energy source largely is hydro, but it is still quite expensive. So as we move away from the traditional sources of, for example, cooking and lighting, we are now improving the technology. And to me, that's the main focus now. As we look for more money to fully transition, we need to gradually get those sources that are more efficient, that reduce, they emit less amounts of greenhouse gases. And we are there. And many people right now out in the rural areas are investing a lot in improved cooking stoves. And they are saving the environment, but they are also helping to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases. Of course, the energy transition plan that has been prepared is clearly indicating that we need more resources, we need money. And that's why we are aggressive as a country, trying to identify innovating financing sources. And climate financing is one of innovative sources, but also we are looking at financing from the private sector, also financing from really ourselves as individuals, taking advantage of the money may be available in circles, money available in, for example, in pension funds, so that we can use these resources to improve our technologies for energy technologies.
All right, and alias you've definitely seen on your screen before is that the motorcade of the Vice President of Cuba, what you're seeing there is actually leaving the Entebbe International Airport, and we'll be heading to his place of residence, and then we shall be giving you more details to where he will be heading next. That is, of course, he's among the key delegates that are going to be representing their countries in relation to the Non-Aligned Movement Summit, where heads of state, key delegates, high officials or high-serving officials are taking part in the decision-making as we continue to come up with, as of course, at the final day, we shall be coming up with the final Kampala document for the final Kampala declaration to show us where the Non-Aligned Movement Summit stands, the position of it amongst the key issues that were tabled: climate change. There is something to do with the Palestinian issue or the Palestinian question, also concerns in relation to debt sustainability, more of that, terrorism. You look at issues to do with food insecurity, amongst the key things that were highlighted to look at how best these countries can come together to find one possible solution. Now, Doctor, back to you here. As we are looking at issues to do with making change and also creating room for us Ugandans or member states or citizens of the member states to be the game changers in climate change, how can we reduce the already available risks of climate change and take charge in making this change?
Well, you are right. We cannot just sit and look on.
Yes.
We need to take action. And that's why we are saying that everybody has a role to play in addressing climate change. Now, if you look at climate change, as we have said, if we are using, for example, firewood, we are using charcoal, and these are emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Now, changing, for example, to more efficient energy sources, more efficient cooking technologies is something we can do as individuals. And already some of these are very easy to do by the people. We have people who have been trained on the ground. We have programs all over the country where people have been trained to actually construct improved cooking stoves, and individuals can do them. But of course, we have seen that some people don't want to change. So we can take action even at that community level to do that. But also we are saying that greenhouse gas emissions are caused by us, for example, practicing poor agricultural practices, destroying the forest cover, because the forests are the ones which absorb those gases from the atmosphere. So once we cut the trees, then obviously we have no base in which we can use to absorb these greenhouse gases. The wetlands are being destroyed for agriculture, for construction and many things. So again, as individuals, we can restore these ecosystems and ensure that they perform the function of absorbing the greenhouse gases, but also absorbing the function of helping us to adapt to these changes. And right now, we are already getting people to know that you can actually protect these ecosystems and continue to getting even more benefits than you were getting before. Right now, around these ecosystems, the wetlands, the riverbanks, we are supporting people to actually implement alternative income generating activities so that they are able, for example, to protect the wetland and start harvesting materials from the wetland and use these materials, some of them in areas where they have banana plantations, they are using them to mulch the bananas, and you find that the productivity has gone down. Some of them are using them to make baskets, mats, and many things. But people are also using those restored ecosystems also around there. People are putting their fish ponds. Some of those people are even putting their beehives and many, many things. So we have many things we can do. We only need to change our mindset. You cannot solve the problems we have now doing the same things. We have to change the way we are doing things, and that's why we are saying that everybody, every Ugandan, from the local level up to the national level, has a very, very big role to play, and if all of us can play our respective roles, then we will be able to make a change that will make this country a much better place to live in.
And well, of course, also to remind you that Dr. Carlest is a commissioner from the Ministry of Water and Environment, and he's under, in this discussion, if I'm to put it in this way, the capacity under which he's coming in is not only as a commissioner, but also as a concerned citizen. So, Doctor, we have 3 years of chairmanship, or holding the chairmanship. From the economic perspective, everyone already has a ground plan or strategy on how we are going to benefit, or how we are going to definitely champion the decisions that will be made as member states and also as the Secretariat chairperson, Uganda. Climate change. You've mentioned the UAE. When the UAE was championing, as the host of COP28 last year, have been championing the discussions and putting up, situations or putting up investments that can furthermore address climate change. Now, us as the chairman, or the country that is holding the Secretariat chairmanship for 3 years of the non-aligned movement, what next in the next 10, let's say 2 decades to come, or in the next few years to come? What should we prioritize from the angle of climate change? Looking at the environment, looking at safeguarding, what would you think should be our priorities?
Well, thank you very much. I would start by commenting on really what I see Uganda benefiting during the next 3 years.
Okay.
Personally, I'm happy that the chairperson of NAM, who is going to be leading and holding Uganda's flag, is Uganda's ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Donia Yebale, who is really somebody that is very familiar with bringing together all these countries to reach a common ground. He has coordinated many, many programs on which Uganda is involved in at the UN. Last year, we had the second United Nations Water Conference in March, which took place in New York. And he ably coordinated the Ugandan team, and we participated very, very actively in that. Also had the Sustainable Development Goals Summit in September last year. He did very well. We're with him in Dubai for the COP28. So is not a stranger to these issues. And personally, I feel that we are going to benefit a lot in many ways. Number one is creating partnerships. We are in an era of partnerships. We are stronger working with the others. There are those who are better maybe than us in terms of technology, and there are many there. There are those who are better than us in terms of the capacity they have, but also in the resources, the financial resources they have. So I feel that during the next 3 years, Uganda is going to benefit a lot in terms of partnerships. Partnering with those countries which have made it. Again, we have seen some developing countries which were like Uganda a few years ago, but they have moved. Some in the Asia, some in, of course, in Latin America and Eastern Europe. So I'm sure through NAM, we are going to benefit by ensuring that we have those partnerships that can make Uganda better. We also ensure that we build capacity, but I also would want that we focus more on taking action that are going to enable us to deal with climate change. His Excellency, the President, has been talking about, every speech he makes, he talks about restoring the environment.
Okay.
Our Uganda's economy depends on natural resources. If you see what we do, for example, we are talking about agro-industrialization, where we want to improve agriculture, but we improve agriculture if our soils are well maintained, if we have water, if the environment is there. If our soils are bare and highly degraded, we cannot talk about agriculture. We're also talking about irrigation. We are talking about improving agricultural production through irrigation, but irrigation needs water. If you don't protect water, then it becomes a problem. We are talking about right now, most of our energy is hydropower, and hydropower is about bringing water to turn turbines. If there is no water, we have issues. We are talking about oil and gas, industrialization, and so forth. So I really would request that as a country, we give more focus to protecting our environment and natural resources, because that's where our socio-economic development is best, and that's where Uganda can transition from where we are to middle-income status and also become a developed country. And if we don't take action, then Uganda will be a country that will really be doomed, and of course it will be very, very difficult to sustain the population that is growing at a very high rate, close to 50 million. This population needs food, needs water, needs jobs, and all of these are going to depend on natural resources.
Okay. Doctor, what would be your last words of encouragement to the Ugandans as well, as we are summing up with our discussion? In your parting shots, your message to the Ugandans out there, and of course also your message to our delegates.
Thank you very much to the Ugandans. My message is Uganda is our country, and we all want to live in a country that really is good to live in, where we can survive, where we can get jobs, where we can get the services we need. But all of this is going to depend on how we actually protect it. So it's not government alone, it's all of us, whether we follow different political inclinations or different faiths or different tribes. At the end of the day, we need to come together as Ugandans to protect Uganda and ensure that it's a country to live in. Climate change is there, challenges are there. We're having challenges of pollution, environmental degradation. We need to come together and contribute to addressing these challenges collectively. And to the delegates during NAM, I really would want to request that you make concrete actions that will help our countries, the NAM member states, really to get out of where they are. You note that most of the NAM member states are really developing countries. We need to change our economies. We need to change our social well-being so that we can also have the services that the developed countries access. Thank you.
All right. And thank you very much for your time, Doctor. Of course, Dr. Carles Tindimugaya is the Commissioner at the Ministry of Water and Environment. Our discussion was looking at the impact of climate change, but furthermore, looking at it in the aspect of the NAM Summit 2024. It is among the issues at hand in relation to the Committee of Economic and Social Affairs that came up with the fact that all these issues that were addressed at hand, climate change is amongst the top 5 that need to critically be looked at and addressed. Of course, we shall be waiting from the final draft of the Kampala document at the declaration to see what the member states decided on the issues of climate change. As of now, continue watching UBC TV because we'll be giving you more details of the arrivals of the heads of states and various delegates. But not only that, we shall as well be keeping you up to speed with every detail coming in from Speak Resort Munyonyo, where the ministerial meetings are taking place, and also giving you details from State House in Entebbe, and details that is concerning IGAD, that is if I'm to put it in that way. But as of now, stick around, we do take a short break. We return with more analysis, discussions, and live broadcast of the NAM 2024.
Bintu biri bisatu ebigaggawaza abantu: production, service delivery, obubbi.
Naye obuzibu obuliwo nti ettaka litugenda okusenda ddene, tuyingidde mu muzikiti fuuti 10. Fuuti 10? Omuzikiti ogwagazaki? Tukusende nagwo. Senda.
3,000 tribes, 2,000 languages, 52 countries, totally divided.
Oto, is it the Namgala you talk about? Yeah. Auto media.
Fire continue burning.
No. Let her teach fire.
You started the fight, let it go on. The wedding is cancelled, and my word, final. And take it from me.
Okay, Dad.
The British that first came to this country came way back in 1843. They were not politicians, they were spies.
It's a call to action, an appeal. Let us heed this call to action and change the narrative of our history. Let us bridge the gap. Let us heal the wounds that have plagued us for far too long. Cease fire. Let us harmonize our future. Cease fire.
Chimanyiddwa buli 14 February omwaka gwonna ebeera Valentine eyaluna egenda kuba ndala nnyo. Tugenda kubeera mu Love Legends Valentine ne Victor Rose ku Kingdom Kampala ng'abanaakeerako okusasula bajja kusasula omutwalo gumu, ate abalala emitwalo 2, VIP emitwalo 5. Abanaakeerako okusasula emmeeza bajja kusasula kakadde, ate wali ku mulyango $2,000,000. Mujje twekuba ma love ku Kingdom Kampala ku Valentine's Day ne Victor Rose.
Nebiwagirwa Star TV.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
Did you know that our #1 value as a nation is to respect and protect the environment? With the current population increase of Uganda and industrialization, this has increased pressure on the natural resources, resulting into environmental degradation and global warming. Developing countries like Uganda could face 80% of the global climate change effects by the year 2030 if no action is taken. Join us here on UBC TV, Inspiring Uganda, on our Eco Plus program, where we bring you an in-depth analysis of issues that are disastrous to our environment. Every Wednesday at 7:30 p.m, only on your loved station, the National Broadcaster.
The energy of this land was born in the hearts of these men, of these women. It comes to life in the power of these colors and the memory of these scents. The energy of this land comes from here. It comes from Africa, and it vibrates in each of us.
Powered by Africa.
Oryx Gas, powered by Africa.
eno bwenuma nga nywako kumiru time era nga ndozako bwenva mu dduliro mu miro nga nywako mu ofisi ya kwafinera zemunywerayo hydration time yeyeka kwenywako the only water that can quench my thirst, yeah. Aquafina, we are good, good, good. Aquafina, hydration that is good, good, good. With essential and good. 10 over 10 water bottle. Aquafina is my drinking water, my love. Oh, oh, oh.
In the production process of Aquafina, we expertly filter every drop, providing clear and perfect tasting water to help you keep hydrated with the added benefit of minerals. Aquafina is bottled by Pepsi Cola International in Uganda and is available at only 1,000 shillings.
Welcome everyone to the biggest game on the continent.
And you have to. You've got to just seize those moments and enjoy them as much as you possibly can.
Get value for your money by choosing the right paint. With Global Paints, you don't just paint, but paint for generations to come. Make Global Paints a paint of choice and make your building a paradise. We have weather coat emulsion, undercoat emulsion, silk vinyl emulsion, flat emulsion, super gloss and high gloss. Global Paint, a reliable product.
Any irritations? No more rashes and irritations. Movit Herbal Jelly and Herbal Soap is rich in natural herbs for a smooth and glowing skin.
Movit all day confidence.
UBC is the national public broadcaster. We educate, inform, entertain, and inspire our audiences. You can watch us on free-to-air channel 001, DSTV channel 282, GoTV channel 371, Star Times channel 201, Zuku TV channel 20, and Azam TV channel 350. Even when your subscription expires, you can still watch UBC for free on your pay TV platforms.
Juko. Yo. Check the shopping, man. What's your secret?
Haven't you heard of the parish development model PDM?
Yes, I did, but I thought it was just a talk.
No, Sebatia. It is real. I and a few friends together formed a circle, accessed money from the PDM, invested in a portrait project, and now things are moving.
Juko. I thought I was one of your friends.
You are.
But you left me behind.
I didn't leave you in poverty. What you do, just visit your LC2 chairperson and your parish chief and start the process of economic transformation. Just like that. The parish development model is an initiative from the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Local Government designed to transform all lives of Ugandans for the better. PDM, my parish, my development, my life.
Well, thank you so much for keeping it UBC, the national broadcaster, and also the official broadcaster for the Non-Aligned Movement Summit that is happening right now at Speak Resort in Munyonyo. Now, the summit started on Monday. Today is day 4 of the summit, and we have over 93 countries that are being represented by respective delegates from those countries. But also, as we speak, heads of state have been jetting into the country since yesterday, and most recently, a few minutes ago, the vice president of Cuba just landed into the country and was welcomed by Minister for the Presidency Millie Babalanda and of course Lucy Nachobe, the head of public service. But in this regard, the chairman or the chairperson of the Non-Aligned Movement Summit Organizing Committee. Now, as we look at matters Non-Aligned Movement Summit, when it started on Monday, when Uganda's representative to the UN, Ambassador Adonia Ayebare, was voted as chairman for the ministers committee. We look into what has been taking place since Monday to today, and of course we are waiting for the declaration, for the Kampala declaration. There was a closed door meeting yesterday by ministers and other officials, and we haven't yet gotten to know what that document entails, but I believe that by the time the summit ends, we will know what that is all about. Of course, some of the issues that were tabled by some of the member countries of NAM were the issue of Palestine and the Israeli war, where Palestine was seeking for collaboration and seeking for a unified voice by member states to ensure that the war in Gaza comes to an end. And of course, Somalia also called upon member states to support it to fight for its sovereignty, so that Somaliland, or the country that some players want to become Somaliland, does not go into that direction. A lot has happened since Monday, and we are here to go through some of the key highlights of the summit. On set with me is Chantal Olive Akandinda, and of course Robert Chirabo Nyonyintono, and my name is Olive Monica Najuma. Now, going back to my colleagues, starting with Robert, a lot has been said, and of course on the sidelines of the NAM summit, we have IGAD that has started today, and also there was the business summit that ended yesterday, and there was the Women in Agribusiness Summit that happened at Serena Resort in Chigo. These summits are feeding into each other, and as a Ugandan watching out there, to what benefit are they to a Ugandan at the grassroots?
A Ugandan at the grassroots, that could be a bit long time. But of course here we have short time and long time benefits. First, we must understand that the constructions that have been happening, we've had a lot of constructions at the Speak Resort, at the conventional center, where government is having shares in that. But also some of the casual laborers, the technical laborers, the engineers, the electricians, sound engineers, all those are being paid. When we come to the infrastructure that is happening here, the painting of roads, the constructions, you have casual laborers. These are getting direct money. And when we come to the hotels, actually, where we have 60 hotels that were accredited, 44 in Kampala, 14 in Entebbe, these hotels, you'll find that they have gotten money to house these people for the time they are going to be there. But also, they do not have gardens, people who are selling their food. So I'm first looking at those that are getting direct money. Now, away from that.
Chirabo, I will have to cut you short for the time being. We are bringing you live footage from Speak Resort Munyonyo as the new chairman, Adonia Ayebare, addresses the press.
What is called South-South cooperation. We cooperate, you know, Uganda cooperates with Indonesia, we cooperate with Singapore on training, we cooperate even within Africa. So that is not institutionalized. Domestication implies that you're going, but Uganda has been very good on South-South cooperation. It's within our development kind of framework. So that's how we're going to do it.
How are you going to domesticate 2,000 paragraphs, especially for the context of Uganda? How are we going to do that so that it trickles down to everyone to understand that we're pushing in the same direction?
No, it's not going to be domesticated. This is a forum where developing countries come to express solidarity with each other, work together bilaterally. Here people are making interactions and networking. So that is the added value of such a meeting. It's not that this document is legally binding, that you should domesticate it. No, it's really to guide us on how we do business, on how we interact with each other in the spirit of solidarity and cooperation.
And I see that there is a lot of solidarity, cooperation. It is a guideline for especially NAM countries, how they desire to move forward. But let me ask the United Nations and the request to be able to have places on the UN security, both Africa, Latin America and Asia. Is that a possibility, and how will NAM front that at the UN?
The international governance architecture is very archaic. Look at the UN Security Council, 1945, not representative of the current reality. We've been calling it for its reform as NAM. We have a working group in NAM on Security Council reform. Not only the Security Council, but also the international financial institution. So these global institutions are not fit for purpose. No wonder the Security Council now is irrelevant in the crisis in Gaza. It's the General Assembly. Let me tell you, we as UN members now, it is to our benefit that the UN is strong. If the UN is stronger, we are stronger as NAM and G77. So we need to reform it, that it's fit for purpose and stronger so that we can work within the UN context. If the UN is not strong, NAM is not strong.
Honorable Ambassador, when we look at especially the next 3 years, Uganda is going to be taking the chairmanship of NAM. What do you hope to achieve in these 3 years, that when we get to 2027 in Uzbekistan, we are able to say this is what we achieved and this is what we got from all this?
What we are going to achieve is to make NAM cohesive, more cohesive. We need to work together, avoid differences that will tear us apart, work together, we will maintain cohesion. Number two, we are going to attempt to change the work methods. We don't need 2,000 paragraphs. You could make them shorter. We are going to appeal to member states because now this document came from Azerbaijan and it's adopted in Kampala. We will have the Uzbekistan document, but it will be done by Uganda. Under our chairmanship, we want to change work methods so that we are more efficient in the way we work. We have already started. Senior officials, 2 days before ministers' meeting, it's never happened. We have already delivered the document. They tested how our chairmanship is going to look like in the senior officials' meeting.
Ambassador, lastly but not least, I was looking at the map and it showed, especially on climate change, heat, drought, all these things going to happen. Does this document have posterity? Is it looking forward, like to look at things like catastrophes in case a pandemic comes? Is that sustainable?
Absolutely, we are looking at all that. You looked at the COP in Dubai, COP in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. You're familiar with the Loss and Damage Fund. That is a key fund that has been advocated by developing countries through the G77. Uganda, again, I've said it before, is the first country to chair both NAM and G77. G77 is very active in the negotiations in COP. We achieved a lot in Sharm el-Sheikh and in Dubai. Now the Loss and Damage Fund is going to be institutionalized and implemented under our chairmanship, and we will make sure that money is easy to access in the case of a catastrophe by member states. We're also looking at pandemics. Azerbaijan did well on COVID. They have set guidelines on how developing countries can develop vaccines, access medicine and PEP when there is a pandemic.
This afternoon we jump into the G77 plus China there. What are your aspirations and what should we hope to be the achievements at the end of it?
We're going to quickly adapt the outcome document. We're going to negotiate, but I'll make sure that the negotiations are as efficient as they were in NAM. Yes. And then we have an outcome document today ready for the summit on 21st.
Any sneak peeks you can give us in both documents that we can be able to look at and hold you accountable?
Everybody was watching the situation in Gaza. Everybody, how NAM, we have really expressed solidarity with the people of Palestine, that the situation is unattainable. We focused on the ceasefire, humanitarian assistance, but we avoided divisive language. The achievement is that we really encouraged the case of South Africa to go to the court so that the court can determine whether there is genocide or not. This forum is political, is not judicial. I was able to convince member states that we don't need to go there. And I think that was the greatest achievement. We will be respected as NAM. that we stood here, people thought it was going to be slogans, condemnation, accusations. No, we focused on the issues, which is people dying in Palestine, dying, killings have to stop so that there is peace. The other issues I sideshow, they are important. Let's wait for the court. And South Africa has really done well by taking the lead. And within a week, we will know. Fasten your seatbelts. Once the court pronounces itself, NAM will pick it, and we will talk about it and implement it in the UN.
Lastly, Ambassador, when we look at conflict, what is causing the conflict globally, and will NAM be able to give guidelines on member states not to be able to interfere with the independence of others and the sovereignty?
Absolutely. When you look at the Kampala political declaration, we are talking about peaceful settlement of disputes. We are talking about non-interference in internal affairs of member states, and those are the principles of NAM that have kept it together, and we will continue pursuing them.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We really appreciate your time here, and thank you for the documents and leading us well through this summit there. We hope to see you this afternoon in G77.
Thank you. Anytime.
So that was His Excellency Ambassador Adonia, and we have been discussing everything that happened in the non-aligned movement, and we have seen especially the outcomes there, a draft that he has been explaining on the political and economic and social there. We also want to look at different things in the G77 to be able to see exactly what's going to happen this afternoon. The declaration is going to be made this afternoon, then we'll start the G77 plus China summit this afternoon, which will proceed into the heads of state that will be here tomorrow to either adopt this document, which will happen between Friday and Saturday here, and we'll be able to see exactly what is happening there. So let me come to Madame Rachel here besides me, and your thoughts especially on the outcome document that the ambassador has spoken about, but also your experience being with the delegates that came here in the country.
It has been an affirmation. The ambassador has said what we've been saying all along, that Uganda has proved itself despite many of the second thoughts that were coming from some quarters. I have spoken personally to a number of delegates, some from Libya, others from Central America, who say they have been surprised at how well prepared Uganda has proven to be. You know, in many parts of the world, they think when you mention Africa, you're talking gorillas and forests. But they were surprised that we are equal to the task. The amenities are available, the skill, the know-how. So really and truly, I think Uganda's message is cohesive. Cohesive in such a way that what we're saying and what is on the ground and what we hope to present to the rest of the world is just that. True.
Do you feel that we have addressed the current realities around the globe, but especially in the NAM member states here?
I think because this is a joint effort. There are so many things an individual nation can do. And that is one of the things that the delegates have been saying again and again. A lot of wealth in one nation can only go so far. A lot of manpower and so on. So it's a question of how well the synergies come together. It's a question of negotiation, and that is a big deal. The negotiating capacity, the capacity to reach compromises, the capacity to smooth over the hard patches, because we know that there are cases where the deliberations are long and drawn out because those compromises are elusive in some places. So what Kampala can do is show its capacity to actually draw the energies together in a way that is satisfactory in most cases, because you can't do it in all quarters. You have to take this will be how well the meeting of minds has been achieved.
Thank you very much. He mentioned just two things there that I wanted to hear your thoughts, especially saying that the UN structure does not fit the current situation, but also the global financial system needs a wake-up call. What are your thoughts on these two elements, especially in the state Africa is in right now?
These are calls that have been long-standing. The latest NAM meeting is just one of the forums where these calls have been pushed to the fore. It is true that the global south is disproportionately affected by these policies. There is more willpower as we speak to push the Brentwood constitutions, as they call institutions. And there is also more willpower to make sure that the United Nations is responsive, because it really is not excusable in this day and age for most of the issues discussed at the United Nations revolving around the nations of Africa. And yet there is no representation where it matters the most, or where the veto power is exercised by people who are a small fraction of the global population. So I think what I've been hearing again and again is the people who are gathered here saying the time has arrived. We've been tabling this issue, but it's time to push it that much harder. It really is of long overdue.
Thank you very much. So that has been what has been happening today. So day 3 and day 4 was the ministerial meetings that were happening here, and they have drawn conclusions.
Well, coming live from Speak Resort, Munyonyo, where the NAM Summit is taking place right now. Earlier, there was a conversation with Uganda's permanent representative to the UN, and that is Ambassador Adonia Ayebare, who also is now the Chair Council of Ministers at the NAM Summit. He was voted in on Monday. It was the first order of business as the NAM Summit kicked off. Now, he has shared a lot of insights regarding NAM's, regarding some of the achievements of this summit that is happening in Kampala, and has actually touched on a few points that we are about to see that will be comprised in the Kampala Declaration. And among these, he mentioned some of the voices or the achievements or the highlights that came out when they decided, the member states, all the countries decided to have one voice and speak about the issue that is the war in Gaza, but also what they decided should go forward as far as managing crises is concerned across the world, especially for member states. Now, coming back to you, Robert, before the ambassador came on, you actually were touching on something that he also happened to mention. He said something to do with that the NAM Summit is not a judicial gathering. He said it is a political gathering. What do you take from that?
Well, I want to use the words of Rachel Takali, who said, this is a meeting of minds. That when these 120 countries meet, or their representatives meet, from the senior officials meeting, where Ambassador Adonia Ayebare was elected chairperson of that meeting, to the ministerial meeting or the Council of Ministers, then to the heads of government, heads of countries. It is basically that we come together and we want to convince each other on certain issues and move together. So it is not binding that because you've pended signature to what we have agreed, we can hold you accountable.
Okay.
It is out of your goodwill. And this is what makes it different with some other bodies. So like there is a Paris Agreement, and because you ratified, you closed yourself to do that. Here, the success of what we have agreed will depend on how each individual state will perceive it and its willingness in the spirit of solidarity and brotherhood.
So basically here it is more of if a certain country deems it fit. There is no
it fit in the spirit of brotherhood, solidarity. But you're not going to come up and say, under NAM we have agreed this, therefore because you are a member and you are part of this, because agreement is by consensus, now we can hold you accountable.
Now, doesn't
sovereignty and individual is still a must there. So that is why even sometimes you've seen critics come up and say, need a secretariat, you need to have more power on this, but it's unique in its nature. And that is its strength at the end.
It is unique in its nature, but what would you say to someone out there who says, okay, since someone cannot be held responsible by what they co-signed on, but they have to choose whether to be in solidarity with a given country or not, how beneficial is that given, let's face it, we inject a lot of money into these summits. They take a lot of time. This one has gone on from Monday to this day, and it is ending tomorrow. So what would you say for residents of member countries who say, if what you decide, you can, because what I hear could be that someone can actually pull out if they don't want to be a part of a certain discussion or conversation, or to be in solidarity with something like a crisis going on, let's say a war in a certain area. What would you say to someone like that?
Well, basically, for a Ugandan, yes, when you host such, there are so many benefits. Economically, global positioning, diplomatically, that is there. Now, for a country that has not yet hosted, you never know when fate may strike, and maybe you need this to be part of you. You need these common voices. You know, for example, now Palestine is benefiting. If these common voices, that you have a number of countries showing solidarity with you, and because it's said by a particular bloc or a movement of countries, other bodies also respect this as a decision. So there are other bodies where this country may belong that have other ways of solving and dealing with conflicts. You know, and good enough, most of these countries are also members of the
UN.
The UN. So, in all ways, there is benefit for this membership and reason for why these declarations should be made.
Okay. The ambassador.
I was going to say there is power in numbers, and that is why ideal politics, what determines whether you are a winner in politics is the numbers you have behind you, the backing you have. So in this case, why I'm saying there is power in numbers, if 10 of us woke up in the morning and we said what you're doing is wrong, it would call upon for reconsideration in a way, but also it would show where there is no support. Usually there is demotivation. So much as the non-aligned movement cannot really can coerce or get directly involved in the, especially for the member countries, they can influence through the power of numbers, and I think that is why that also brings out the element of sovereignty and the element of respecting the boundaries and the politics of the different countries.
For example, one of the issues that Ambassador Yebare has pointed out and has been so much, I remember the representative from South Africa during the Council of Ministers, she was very vivid representation on the United Nations Security Council. I said, the way this thing is working is it's outdated. We need a stronger. These countries individually, I'll speak for my country, Uganda, His Excellency has been vocal on this. I've seen the President of Rwanda also vocal on this, a number of presidents. But now when it comes as part of a resolution, in the declaration, the Kampala Declaration, I think it makes more sense to people that, hey, listen, even when these people met and sat in these huge numbers, this is something they re-emphasized.
Well, as you can see on your screen, we still have more heads of state jetting into Uganda for the end sessions of the Non-Aligned Movement Summit. Today is day 4, and the summit will be ending tomorrow. So we will be giving you more updates regarding the president that is jetting in as at this minute. Now, Chantal, you mentioned that there are powers in numbers. There is power in numbers, and like Chirava said, the ambassador Adonia Ayebare said that developing countries are disproportionately represented when it comes to the UN. Yet these are the organizations that are discussing issues that are for and about Africa.
The developing countries.
Yes. So when you look at that and what has been happening over the years, where African leaders have consistently argued that we need to be heard. It's like, how we've had committees in the past discussing women's issues, but when there are no women on the councils. So this is what developing countries are telling these other committees, that we need to have a proper seat at the table. And this is what they have been mentioning since NAM started. How does that, what would you say to something like that? And is this one way of African countries and other developing countries finally getting themselves away from the cloud of neocolonialism and being able to stand on their own?
Yes, and you see, one of the mandates or of the resolutions, or of the reasons as to why the non-aligned movement was put in place was to fight neocolonialism. And you will realize that the biggest percentage of the members that are under the United Nations, these were colonial masters here. And how does a colonial master sit and deliberate upon a former colony when the former colony is not involved or is not actively involved to a particular level? So definitely it is true, we need to have more representation on the United Nations because we are the subject. So there is no way I can be the subject when I am not in there. It's more like how you plan for say people of Kampala, and they're not, you're not involved with them. You don't know what affects them. You don't know how it affects them and what exactly they can suggest as solutions to help the situation. So in this case, definitely we do need more representation on the UN Security Council, because as we are being discussed, we ought to be there. We have solutions, we have suggestions, and that is what we need at the moment.
Now, going back to your screen, the Prime Minister Hassan Majaliwa, the Prime Minister of Tanzania, is jetting in as of this minute, and we are getting ready to receive him. As you can see, his plane is touching down, and any minute from now we will be receiving him and of course take him to the summit venue. Many more heads of state are expected to be coming into the country as we speak. Some arrived yesterday, majority are arriving today, and we will be able to give you these updates. The plane is taxiing, and we will be able to see him coming off Air Tanzania and stepping onto Ugandan soil, ready to attend the Non-Aligned Movement Summit that is happening in Munyonyo since Monday. Today is day 4, and we are going forward. Now, Chantal, I like your take on where the presidents of developing countries are now in unison calling for, am I right to call it change in the way things have been done, in changing the status quo as we knew it? Because now, and this was evidenced by what happened when the Ukrainian and Russian crisis broke out. And we saw many countries, by then I think many Ugandans didn't even know about the non-aligned movement. But many were wondering, why is Uganda saying, for us, we do not meddle in the issues of our countries? Now, NAM has made us understand why our president took that stand from the beginning to this day. What would you say, Chirabo, are the benefits of, let's say, Uganda as a country being non-aligned?
First and foremost, Chantal talked about numbers that matter and play greatly. Now, you may be peaceful per se, and it's not about conflict, because the initial formation of NAM had a connection with a conflict, which was the Cold War by then, and some countries were aligning with USSR and other United States. So of course, there are various systems, capitalism and socialism. But you could have other issues, and standing alone may be very hard, where you need global attention against oppression. Or, for example, today you may find that Uganda is challenged after passing the anti-homosexuality law. We don't know how far that can go, but maybe a time comes and you need the brethren to come with you and stand with you in solidarity and voice your problem, voice your issue more. Individually, it may not be. But if you're a member of NAM, today, when you see issues of Palestine and Israel being brought on table, this may not be directly concerning Uganda, but indirectly. But if any of this country went alone, it wouldn't create that impact. Today, that you're having 120 countries discussing this, if this comes out in a final paper presented, then this goes to the UN, it will be a solution to a problem. Then 2, global positioning. The more, because you find that these also create marketing. Countries spend a lot of money on advertising, on selling themselves. I want to use the commonest example known by very many football fans, how our brothers Rwanda spend a lot on Arsenal. Having just that Visit Rwanda on this jersey is not something small, and not something that you're giving very little money for that. So, global positioning, it helps so very much. Negotiating, having a common voice, those are some of the clear and evident benefits a country gets.
Now, we can see that Air Tanzania is already landed at Entebbe International Airport, and Tanzania's Prime Minister Hassan Majaliwa is about to step down and be received on the red carpet, ready to go and join his colleagues at Speak Resort Munyonyo for the NAM Summit. As you can see, he is about to get out of the plane and be received in Uganda. Now, Tanzania played a pivotal role in the non-aligned movement. Tanzania, it is an active and prominent member state of the non-aligned movement, and it's been around since the days of independence of Tanganyika in 1961. And in the early days of the movement, President Julius Nyerere was recognized as one of the leading figures in the movement and among third world leaders in general at the time. Now, his government promoted close adherence to non-aligned principles and has continued to do so. And in this, the global north and the global south division was more important than the Cold War. Now, Tanzania has been cooperative when it comes to the non-aligned movement principles, and it has also engaged in a strong criticism of superpower intrusion in African affairs, and has also over the years supported many orders, including the new international economic order. In the days when Tanzania was still called Tanganyika, and at the time when it was not yet independent, that's when the summit came to fore. But later on, Tanzania was able to join it after it got its independence. Now, in the first summit of the non-aligned movement summit, Tanzania's Prime Minister is currently on the red carpet being received into Uganda. His name is Hassan Majaliwa, and he is in Uganda right now to join other high-level officials that have already come into the country. Among these, Cuba's Vice President just landed. and has already arrived in Uganda. Now, as I was mentioning earlier, Tanganyika was still not independent at the time of the first summit of the non-aligned movement. And its then President Nyerere made a symbolic trip to the host city at the time of Belgrade, the capital of Yugoslavia. And that same year, it reaffirmed Tanganyika and its intention to pursue future non-aligned policy. And Tanzania played a particularly active role in the movement on regional and international issues during the Cold War period. At the time, the country was elected member of NAM and coordinating bureau at the United Nations. And in this, it played an important role in the movement's coordinated efforts in that body. And later on, it was elected. Later on, it was elected as the chair of the drafting and was the chair of the drafting committee ahead of the 1972 Non-Aligned Movement Ministers Conference and the 5th summit of the non-aligned movement in 1976. Now, in 1970, Tanzania hosted preparatory meeting of the non-alignment countries in Dar es Salaam ahead of the 3rd summit of the non-aligned movement in Lusaka, Zambia. Tanzania has been active and has actively participated in summits that have occurred since then to this day. And as we have seen, its Prime Minister has just landed in Uganda to attend the 19th Non-Aligned Movement Summit. That is happening in Uganda. That started on Monday and still going on as of today. And the Prime Minister, Hassan Majaliwa, is here to be part of that summit. Now, coming back, Chantal, we have benefits. We have unpacked some of the benefits of being non-aligned. And I like to borrow from your vocabulary, as earlier said, that there is power in numbers.
Right.
Now, Chirabo mentioned some of the benefits of Uganda being part of NAM and, of course, being non-aligned. So what do you expect to see as a Ugandan in the next 3 years as Uganda takes the mantle to be the chair of the summit?
Well, I think earlier on when we were having a discussion with Chirabo, we actually also unpacked that there is need for more organization when it comes to the non-aligned movement. We need a secretariat. We need to now get from the point where we are fighting, you know, neocolonialism and the Cold War and everything, and now get to another step where we get more organized as the non-aligned movement. I'm hoping that with these 3 years, President Yoweri Museveni is able, one, to create room for more countries to join. Yes, we are seeing South Sudan joining on this summit, so hopefully we see more countries being interested to join. Hopefully we see that we get more organized, have a secretariat, and have, say for example, have, I don't want to say funds, but still it's funds. See how we can put in place a budget or a trust that can be used to fund some of these events, especially because we know that these are developing countries, and pulling off such events sometimes will leave impact economically and budget-wise when it comes to these countries. So if that can be done and put in place, it would mean that going forward, maybe these countries will not even have to borrow or even pass emergency budgets or supplementary budgets to handle some of the preparations that have to be done to make sure that we pull off these summits. So I'm looking forward to such improvements under the NAM. I'm looking at such improvements internally when it comes to the non-aligned movement. But of course, as a country, I'm looking forward to more foreign direct investment. Like I think, like I heard someone say that some people thought Uganda was bushes and gorillas. And then now they're seeing cities. I mean, they're sleeping in hotels that are, you know, five-star hotels. Okay, call them 4-star if you want to, but they are comfortable where they are staying. We've not had any issues so far. So that means that we are now more open. We have now been seen from a different lens or a different perspective. That means we are now putting ourselves out there and saying, let me just conclude and say this could be an invitation to treat to some of our investors.
Well, one thing I have picked out from the NAM summit, and for Uganda being able to host all these summits all at the same time, we had the business summit, we had the women in agribusiness, and we have IGAD starting that has started today, and then we have the G77 plus China summit that is starting later on today. So us being able to have all these heads of state, to have everyone gather in Uganda, like Shirabo said, and like many, even the permanent representative of Uganda to the UN, Ambassador Adonia Ayebari, said this has helped to stamp Uganda on the world map. Now people know we exist. Now people know what we stand for and the investment opportunities we have in the country. And now speaking about the arrivals, we have just received the Prime Minister of Tanzania, that is Hassan Majaliwa, and later on we will be receiving the Prime Minister of Rwanda. Looks like East Africa is being well represented. Yes.
The question would be though, okay, you've used the word representation. Why don't we have the heads of states showing up? That's what I would personally, I think it raises eyebrows. We are a stone throw away from Tanzania and Rwanda.
Chirabo, I will throw that back to you, but I remember one time him and I were having a side conversation, and he said the Prime Minister is the head of government business.
Okay.
So where the Prime Minister is, there is the president is there, so to speak.
If it were the vice president, I would say, because now it's more political. Head of government business, we're looking down into service delivery, we're looking down into infrastructure development. But when you talk about president, vice president, I am talking ideas. I am talking a whole different conversation.
Well, that also depends, and this is when I go to Chirabo, because some countries don't have presidents. They have prime ministers, but
they serve
at that level.
They serve at the level of the overall. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Now, in international relations, the diplomatic corps, as long as you have been given power to represent, there the prime minister is representing the president. And in most cases, you may end up there reading speeches
on behalf.
Reading
speeches on behalf.
Yeah,
that what they wanted to communicate, he's there, just that he's not there physically.
Okay, now that we have the prime ministers that have jetted in from the countries of East Africa, this is when I would like for us to focus our binoculars, as far as NAM is concerned, on the region that is East Africa. We already have had some issues within East Africa, and in the area of economics especially, where one country will close its borders to the agro products of another country. We have experienced this between Uganda and some neighboring countries. At one point we had a border closed off for over 2 years, and as we speak right now, the border between Burundi and Rwanda is also closed. So do you think that this is also the opportunity or the environment where such issues can be handled, and so that to ensure there is cohesion and cooperation among member states?
Well, that is another interesting thing, I must say, though not very good in terms of economics. But you see, when you look at these international gatherings or groupings where countries come together, for example, the East African community, now we have the non-allied movement. One thing that a country doesn't lose, it's its independence and sovereignty. And when you come to this table, you don't lose that because of the grouping you're in. And you see that most of these, that is respected. However, to some, they are legal binding documents. For example, if you look at the East African Community, free movement of goods and services. And remember, during that time, that is what most of the member states were pointing to. That, yes, now Rwanda and Congo may have these issues, but you find that they'll bring Tanzania, they'll bring Uganda, they may bring South Sudan to discuss these issues under the East African Community. That they may not compel you forcefully, but through brotherly terms. That is why you find they use a word of solidarity, the word of cohesion, you know, that
cooperation.
That's the language they are using. That we may not force you, but because you agree we are a family, what you're doing is wrong. And then other members of the family are pointing to you. So as a reasonable brother, you find you have to adjust, to dance according to the family music and tunes. That is where basically we have. So it remains a bit challenging. That is why it is more of a meeting of minds. That in these heads of states, how are you convinced? How do you feel being part of this union, part of this movement? Would you still want to do the same thing that other people in the movement are seeing as bad? Or would you want to fit better and correspond and act and behave accordingly?
Well, we can't go further than this. Time check is 3 minutes to the hour of 1. We will be handing you over to the newsroom to bring you updates about the summit and many other highlights as far as news is concerned in our country and, of course, away from the country. We are still broadcasting live from Nile Avenue. This is Uganda Broadcasting Corporation, the official broadcaster of the Non-Aligned Movement Summit. My name is Olive Monica Najuma. Stick with us.